Hello, everyone. Welcome to a Dolphin Communication Project deep dive. Today, we are going to step away from dolphins and head over to sperm whales. I'm very excited to be joined by Ana Eguiguren. She is from Ecuador and she is a PhD student in Dr. Hal Whitehead's lab. Her sperm whale research focuses on behavior at a fine scale. She is an author on a chapter on a recently published book, Sex and Cetaceans, a fantastic book that's actually open access digitally. So everyone around the world can have access to this amazing compilation of great work. And we are, of course, very lucky to have Ana with us this evening. If you're listening live, just remember to put your questions into the chat. We will get to those at the end. If you're listening to the recording, thank you for joining us. With that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Ana.
Thanks so much, Kel. Well, thanks so much for the invitation. I really appreciate the space. As you mentioned, today I'm going to be talking about the chapter that we wrote along with my colleagues Christine and Mauricio on the reproduction of sperm whales, which was a bit of a side project for me throughout my PhD, but it was super helpful to understand a bit more about the forces that drive sperm whale behavior and evolution. So just to get into sperm whales, most people's notion of sperm whales come from Moby Dick, or at least that's how I first learned of them. And in this novel, sperm whales are thought of this aggressive, vengeful, and cunning creature that has the ability to teletransport itself to sink ships across the ocean. But as I've come to learn, this perspective is very far from the truth in terms of how aggressive sperm whales are, but also in terms of how they behave, and it very much is skewed towards what males are doing. So getting into what sperm whales are in real life, they have often been referred to by Hal Whitehead, who's my supervisor, and who's been studying them for over decades as an animal of extremes. And they are extreme in many ways. One of them is how deep they dive. They are one of the deepest diving mammals on Earth, going over 2,000 meters below sea level. Usually when they go down there, they're looking for squid. They are also the largest odontocyte, being like cetaceans with hard teeth, and they have the largest brain in the world in terms of absolute size specifically. They also have the largest nose in the whole world, which is pretty much can take up to 1/3 of their entire body size. So all of these adaptations, including this big giant nose and this big giant brain, help them, among other things, to find the prey that they feed on, which in most of the cases is squid. They feed on squid normally at depths of between 300 and 600 meters, although they have gotten down to 2,000 meters. And at these depths, where there is absolutely no sunlight, they use echolocation to find their prey, which, just like bats and like dolphins, which you might have learned before, they just emit these pulses of sound that bounce against objects and allow them to calculate the distance to this object. This is just a fun photo of a piece of a squid that was like a food crumb that we found when we were in the Galapagos last year. There was a group of sperm whales around us, and there was a group of pilot whales harassing them. And in the mess, someone dropped a crumb of a pretty big squid right there, which is what you see in the picture. So in terms of how extreme they are, sperm whales are also very extreme in how they reproduce and in their social behaviors. I will get into that throughout the talk as we come, but a little bit before getting into that, I wanted to talk about the ways that sperm whales are studied because there's been a giant shift. A lot of what we know about sperm whales in terms of their biology, like basic biology, comes from the whaling era, specifically in the first half of the 1900s. There was big scaled industrial whaling, and in that time, researchers would go aboard whaling vessels and get data from all the whales that had been killed, which included what their sex was, their sizes, fecundity, weaning age, all of these details about sperm whale reproduction we know from whaling data. But their behavioral observations were oftentimes a bit wonky and off base because they were doing research during whaling operations, which were a particularly stressful moment for sperm whales. Nowadays, we study sperm whales alive, and our focus is mostly turned into their behavior. For this, the work that I'm most familiar with is that whales are tracked for and searched for primarily acoustically by deploying towed hydrophones, so a microphone that you toss in the water, and we put a 100-meter cable off the boat and use this to listen for the sperm whale clicks. I was not able to make the sound reproduce, but sperm whale clicks sound very much like a metronome, and they are very easy to tell apart from any other noise in the sea. So once we hear them, we can then hone in and start finding them. And when we find them, we take pictures of their flukes and take notes of their behavior, and that's how we've learned most of what we know today. A lot of this work has been pioneered by Hal Whitehead's lab, and most of what I'm going to talk about later on has been discovered by these students and colleagues like Cindy Weigart, Luke Randall, and Mauricio Tan. So back to the whales and how they are extreme in their reproduction. Sperm whales are one of the most dimorphic animals in terms of different sexes. So males can be about 40% longer than a female and up to 3 times as heavy, as you can see in this picture. And the other bit that is distinctive is the nose to body ratio. So if you see in this picture here, the male's nose is about 1/3 of his body, while the female's nose is about 1/4 of its body. So this is one of the things that help us identify them easily when we are at sea. They also have very dimorphic distributions. So while females and juveniles, you are mostly found in tropical waters and temperate waters, males can be found from the ice edge tips down to the tropics, so have a much wider distribution. Not only that, but their social lives and behaviors are very different. So going into female sperm whales, they are highly social. So much so that they spend almost their entire life with a close group of associates, which are mostly other females that are oftentimes matrilineally related. So that means their aunts, their grandmas, and sometimes their cousins. And we call these tight groups of highly associated sperm whales social units. And a lot of the social unit revolves around calf care. So the reason for that being that producing a calf for a sperm whale is very expensive. Female sperm whales mature at about 9 years of age and can conceive their first calf at about 10 years of age, which is not too old, but they have a very slow reproductive rate where they will produce 1 calf every 1 to 6 years, and they have a gestation period of about 14 months. A single calf will also nurse between 3 up to 3 years of age, and we know that from when whalers would look at stomach contents of calves and find whether there's milk. And the oldest calf that had milk in its tummy was about 13 years old, so they can nurse for a very long time, although that will be supplemented with other food items like fish, and weaning happens at a slow rate. So calves are very precious to the sperm whales. And so what's This quote here captures that really well, and we included it in the chapter. This comes from the information that whalers would note about how when sperm whales were being attacked and when calves were attacked, the sperm whales would not leave them under any circumstance. And often this would cause great harm to the sperm whales themselves, which was one of the techniques that whalers would use to keep big groups of sperm whales together. So they have evolved to collaboratively care for their young. On one sense, they use defense against predators. This is an image representing the famous rosette that sperm whales form that has been observed when sperm whales are being attacked by killer whales or other threats, where they will all face a calf or a vulnerable individual and show their flukes towards the edges. And the flukes are often used as like defense mechanisms, but this also makes them very vulnerable to the predators around them. And they also cooperatively care of their calves by using basically babysitting. So allonursing has been observed among sperm whales, which means that sperm whale babies will nurse from multiple females, not only their moms. And this can be seen because sperm whales usually when they suckle, when they will perform these very shallow dives at the side of the females, and they do this on multiple different individuals. And also at a given time, there will be more nursing whales than there are calves. So this tells us that it's not just a mother-calf relationship. Additionally to this cooperative care mechanisms, sperm whales have a semi-menopause, which basically means that after a certain age, about 40 years, sperm whales will produce very few offspring. And this is thought to have evolved in other species, such as humans and orcas, for example, to allow for the care of the next generation of that female that is no longer reproducing, but still procuring fitness for her through caring of the young of the next generation following her. So this is what we know about how social units and what they are for. And this in turn has given rise to a complex level of social structure in sperm whales, in which the finest level is the units, which are these very tight-knit groups of sperm whales that associate for long periods of time. But then social units will interact with other social units for a couple of hours up to a couple of days to form what is known as social groups. But these groups are not formed at random. They are formed only between whales that belong to the same clans. And the way that we first discovered clans was based on distinct vocal dialects. And these dialects are based on the vocalizations that sperm whales make when they are socialized. These are called codas, and they sound like kind of like dropping marbles. They are stereotype series of clicks that have specific temporal patterns. So one typical coda is a 5 regular that sounds like click, 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 click. So only whales that have shared dialects of codas will interact with each other. And when we look at the clan distribution, for example, across the Pacific Ocean, this is the figure made by our colleague Taylor Hirsch. And here you see the different clans that are found across the Pacific Ocean, some of which occur in symmetry within the Galapagos Islands, which is one of the regions that has been most studied, but they can be found all over the Pacific Ocean. And clans not only have different vocal dialects, but they also have distinct social behaviors, movement patterns, and different sensitivities to environmental change. So this is the very complex life of female sperm whales. Moving on to the male sperm whales, they fall in the complete other end of the social spectrum, with their lives being primarily solitary. So males also physically mature at about 9 years of age, but are left behind at about that time when they are physically mature, meaning that their testes have developed fully. And at that point, when the males are left behind these groups, they will start migrating in solitary to find bachelor groups of other juvenile males, some of which can be found, for example, in New Zealand. And as they mature, males will become more and more solitary. And they will start migrating towards polar waters where there's more food that they can access. And since they are so big, they're not vulnerable to the predation that would make those waters not suitable for the females and the juveniles. And there they continue to grow throughout most of their lives. Male sperm whales although they mature at 9 years of age, they will not sexually participate in reproduction until they're about 20 years old, at which point they will be about 16 meters long compared to the roughly 9 meters that females have. This is a photo of a male sperm whale found off Norway, and this is in these waters, you would almost exclusively only find male sperm whales. Then, after being growing for all this time, mature males will return to the warmer waters where the females and the calves are found. In this picture here, just for size reference, you can see an image taken by a drone, and you might notice the whale that is in the top right corner is a male, and all the other ones are females, and it's a giant individual. And what happens when the males come back to the reproductive waters is that they will rove between groups of females. And in this case, female selection plays a strong role. A male that approaches a group of females may be taken in, and females will start rolling over and being very curious, interact with the male and follow him, or they might completely ignore him, dive and leave him behind. So it seems like at that level, it's very much up to the females. There's questions about competitions between males, because usually the older descriptions of the sperm whale society would describe harems in which one mature male will have control over a group of females. But then it was found that that was not the case at all. And there's a lot of things we don't know, like why do females choose certain males over others? We don't know what happens to the coda repertoire of males. They have left their natal groups and they sometimes return to their same waters, but not all the time. They are known to cross between clans. So there's a lot of stuff we don't know about how this takes place. We also don't know exactly how copulation takes place, and it hasn't really been observed yet. This goofy picture here was made by Peter Best, which is one of the people that was studying them in the early 1900s. And this is our best notion of how they copulate, but we don't really know. It's very hard to see. So this idea of mate choice in females brings us up to a couple of questions. One of them is, what's up with this giant nose that the male sperm whales have? One of the older and original theories is that they use it as a battering ram or as a means of butting heads into other males to compete for the females. And a lot of this idea comes from older tales of males, not necessarily just fighting with each other, but also attacking ships and sinking them, which is the origin story of Moby Dick, which was actually inspired by an incident that was reported off the Galapagos Islands in the eastern tropical Pacific, where a whale was reported to have sunk a ship. So this giant head and the fact that it looks very much like a flat, very much like a battering ram, and we see all these scratches here that may come from interactions with other males, have led people to theorize that that's what the big nose evolved for. But when the sperm whale males are seen in the breeding grounds, there are no sightings of interactions aggressive interactions between males. In fact, it seems that males avoid each other very extremely. So what's up with the giant nose in that sense? The leading theory right now is that they use it as a display mechanism to somehow advertise something that is attractive to the females. And how that works is a very nifty characteristic of the sperm whale clicks. So when we look at sperm whale clicks in this diagram here, it shows time in the x-axis and amplitude. So each individual spike here is an individual click. So you can, this would sound something like click, 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 click. If you zoom into one individual click, people have found that they have distinct pulses within a click. And the distance between these pulses is referred to the interpulse interval, is proportional to the size of the nose of the sperm whale. The reason why these pulses emerge is how comes from how the sound is produced. So sperm whale sound is produced at the tip of the nose in what is referred to the monkey's lips, which is a modified nostril, pretty much. And so a pulse is emitted there, and it goes out into the water, but it also goes back into the skull of the whale and back out. So this kind of internal echo results in these pulses, and the difference in time between this echo is proportional to the size of the nose. This is true for all whales, females and males. But in the case of males, the theory is that males evolved a larger and larger nose so that they could advertise a larger and larger sound. So the idea there is that females would have a preference for larger sounding males. Specifically, males produce clangs, which are very slow clicks and very, very loud clicks. In fact, they are the loudest sound produced by any creature. They can be heard over 60 kilometers by other sperm whales. And the evidence for this being the purpose of this big nose is that they are heard mostly in breeding grounds, these clangs. However, they have also been heard in more northern waters where only males are found. So in this sense, they may also be serving to advertise to other males, like, hey, I'm here, do not come near me, I'm eating here. So this is a very explanation of why possibly the sperm whale males have this giant nose and why they might not be necessarily a weapon, but more of an advertisement tool. So from what we know about sperm whale reproduction and sperm whale social behavior, which are both very closely linked to each other, there are some important takeaways for the conservation of the species that emerge. The sperm whale population, because of the whaling in the open boat years, which was in the 19th century, as well as the industrial whaling in the early 1900s, their population decreased by about 70% from the original numbers, which is what is shown in this graph here. This shows different models of population trends, but the red one is like the one that has the most support. And you can see how it has a very big dip after the 1950s, and it has very, very slowly began to recover. So this recovery, even though right now whaling is not legal and it was completely banned in the 1980s, and there are no industrial whaling operations, the recovery sperm whales has still been very slow. Part of this is because of the very slow reproductive rate that I mentioned earlier on sperm whales. They are, in fact, one of the mammals with the slowest reproduction rate. Some of the things that have contributed to this very slow reproduction have also been some mistakes in the policy. So traditionally, we consider females to be the limiting factor on the reproductive capacity of a species, because a female is the one that takes the most energy and the most time and determines whether a male can reproduce or not. However, in the case of so this idea made it so that policy said it's fine if we continue to hunt males. And in fact, there was areas like the Eastern Pacific, specifically in Peru and Chile, where the whaling industry target males almost exclusively, to the point where they had virtually disappeared the adult big old males in the 1980s. This resulted in sperm whales in the Eastern Pacific area having a tremendously slow recovery rate, because even though females weren't being hunted, there was no males to reproduce, and it would take over 2 decades for those big males to be replaced, so them to grow enough to become part of the reproductive pool again. So this has made the recovery of this area particularly slow. And there's also another reason why the recovery has been slow, is that there are ongoing threats. So some of these threats that sperm whales still face are global and are affecting all sperm whales and probably all marine life at a similar level. Some of these are climate change and oceanic pollution. Climate change changes the distribution of their prey, which is very sensible to changes in temperature. And oceanic pollution includes anything from polluting chemicals as well as plastic. A lot of recent news have come up of sperm whale strandings having large amounts of plastic in their stomach, which includes stuff like trash as well as fishing gear. So that is one problem that probably affects sperm whales around the world. There's also localized cases in which sperm whale populations have been decimated by fisheries interactions, specifically entanglement. This is the case for the Mediterranean population, which is critically endangered. And the reason for this is a very big effort of specifically gillnet fisheries, illegal fisheries in the Mediterranean that have been threatening the population. I have put an asterisk there, though, because we only have good information about the rate at which fisheries interaction happen when sperm whales live closer to the coast, like in the Mediterranean. But when sperm whales live very far off the shore, like happens off in the Eastern tropical Pacific, we really don't know whether the degree to which these fisheries are impacting sperm whales, particularly because sperm whales sink when they die more often than not. And so if they are entangled and die in the open ocean, it's very unlikely that we're going to find them. And it's very hard that we will have reporting of these incidents in the open ocean. Another threat that sperm whales keep facing are acoustic pollution, specifically sonar or underwater mining exploration. These are very dangerous for most marine life. You might be familiar with how sonar produces these tremendously loud sounds that can at least scare sperm whales away, and at the most cause them to damage their ears and the organs that they use to orient themselves. So they won't be able to orient in space and eventually die, or they might get scared and come off to the surface too quick and have diver's illness basically and die from that as well. And then there's also very localized threats, including intense whale watch tourism, which is one of the things that has been brought up in another critically endangered population, which are the Eastern Caribbean sperm whales, where because they live very close to the land and they're very predictable, there are whale watching tours and they have swim with whale operations. So recently, there's been a good progress made in the region so that the rate at which this activity takes place has been controlled, because until recently, it had been done just anyone who can and wants to can just be thrown in the water with a group of sperm whales, which is potentially not safe for the whales and not safe for the tourists as well. To this, based on the social structure and complex behavior of sperm whales, we need to add another layer, that is the interaction between the sperm whale clans, which are cultural entities and these threats. So clans, different clans can be found in different places, which can make different clans vulnerable to these different threats. So for example, there can be some very resident clans in the Eastern Tropical Caribbean, and they will be, in the Caribbean Ocean, and they will be vulnerable to these localized threats. But also clans have different sensitivities to specific environmental threats. So that makes them differentially vulnerable to these global threats. So for example, one of the clans found off the Galapagos Islands is much more sensible to El Niño changes, which warm the water, than the other clans. So that means that when there is climate change, potentially this clan could be facing much more hardship than the other clans. So if you just count the number of whales in a region, you might be missing a very important detail, which is the clan structure, and that could lead you to lose entire clans without even noticing. So yeah, to tie it up, the sperm whale society and social and life history is very much influenced by the sperm whale's reproductive behavior. And at the same time, these two elements, their behavioral history and their reproductive history, impacts how we can protect them in the future. So I'd like to thank my supervisor, Hal, who is responsible for much of the knowledge that I've talked about here today, and for the local organizations, specifically the National Park in the Galapagos and the Charles Darwin Foundation, which gave us the permits to do the research that my thesis is based on, and that a lot of the drone pictures that you just saw came from. And thank you to Kel and the DCP for letting me come up and share this stuff.
We're so grateful for your time and that information. I'm going to do our little wrap up, and then we'll get to questions. So everyone still has a little bit of time to submit some more questions if you want. So for anybody who's new to DCP webinars, if you're watching this on YouTube, obviously you can see all of our programs there. You can also watch recordings directly on our website. Just head there, and under the Knowledge Hub, you'll see the webinars. And then this was a deep dive, so more technical, a little bit longer, not shying away from different topics. We also have dolphin lessons. So those are geared toward younger students and the young at heart. We try and keep it a little bit simpler and a little bit shorter. And then if you've watched all of those and you need more, do check out our podcast, The Dolphin Pod, wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, we would not exist without our supporters. So I have to thank everyone who supports DCP through various ways. Some of those ways are on the screen now. And one of our newest ways is that you can become a dolphin protector. So you can kind of pledge your support for dolphins and receive a little kit with information and a certificate. And it's just a fun little way to spread education, get some conversations started in your families and things like that. And of course, please stay in touch, so you can keep in touch by email, by social media, and we look forward to future talks. But first, some questions. And I will continue to monitor the chat, so if anybody thinks of more, please send them along. But we'll see, I guess at the end, I'm kind of going to go out of order. But when you were talking about the clans again, the question is, are clans determined by their dialects or by their associations, or both, or more?
Yeah, that's a great question. We, like scientists, identify them identify them by a mix of dialect and their associations. So what originally happened was that they had collected a bunch of photographs of whales, and they were looking at their association network. So who hangs out with who? And that they had one level of information. And then they looked at the dialects collected by those groups of whales. And they noted that there was a big divide between the whales that were associating with each other, having shared dialects, and not sharing a dialect with whales with which they don't share an association. And like that goes both ways, right? So they don't associate with whales that don't have their dialects. Yeah.
Thank
Does that make
you.
sense?
Yes. How do you recognize individual sperm whales?
We use their flukes, so like their tail. The sperm whale flukes have very marked, most often, they have many notches, marks, and little bites off along the edge of the fluke. So traditionally, you would match between whales to see like if we've seen this individual in one year or another by hand, and we still do a lot of that. And recently, we've been using this tool, Fluke Book, which allows us. It's nice because you put all your catalog online, and then you can compare between your catalog and say your catalog from our colleague in the Caribbean. But then it also incorporates artificial intelligence to suggest potential matches. And it does that really well.
Good. AI for good, not for evil.
Yeah.
One of our viewers was surprised that there were sperm whales in the Mediterranean. I think that you said that. Do those individuals stay in the Mediterranean, or do they interact with and kind of cruise along in the Atlantic?
So yeah, I am not tremendously familiar with the Mediterranean movement, but from my understanding, there is a resident Mediterranean population generally, and they are very fun. It seems like it's one clan and a very funny clan because it has like very few quotas that they make. It's a small population, so a bit the hypothesis there that mostly comes from Luke Rendell, who's the one that works there, is that it might be like a residual clan because it has been so decimated. It's just like this simplified society.
Cool. That's very interesting.
Mhm.
Does anyone know of any hybrids between a sperm whale and another species?
I don't think so. And I'm pretty sure there isn't. The reason being that sperm whales are super weird. Like,
Yeah, it would be hard to think of a match for them.
yeah, but when you look at the phylogeny of cetaceans, you have like odontocetes, mysticetes, and in the odontocetes, you have like just at the beginning, the branch of the sperm whales, and they go like, and everybody else goes another way. So there's no like the closest thing are the pygmy sperm whales, but they're like way, way little. So I don't think they could.
They could. And then I think our last question was you mentioned how deep they dive at the beginning, and someone is wondering how scientists even came up with that, and if it's an estimate or if it's data, I guess.
That's a cool question. Well, what they've done is they tag the whales mostly with this temporary tags that are called D tags, and they have this like it's like they have what's the word? Sorry, I'm blanking with the name of this sucker.
Like a suction cup?
Yeah, suction cup. Yes, that's the word. So they are attached through suction cups and they collect data on the depth at which the whales are. And then at a certain point, the suction cups they have a program and it releases. And then the researchers go collect it and then get the data.
Very cool. Well, this was very interesting work and always a good reminder, I think, for people to remember how big the ocean is and how much we know, yet how much we still have to learn. And so I hope that some people will be inspired about these these funny little, not little whales that maybe they've kind of only seen drawings of or heard about in a whaling museum or Moby Dick, something like that. And maybe they're a little more intrigued by them and inspired, and hopefully see how our human choices and actions are having impacts that reach all the way to a majestic creature like the sperm whale. So if there's anything else you want to add, Anna, feel free. But otherwise,
Yeah.
I would just thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It was really nice having this chance to share this with you guys.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And hope to see you at another talk another day.
Thank you
Bye.
all for coming. Bye bye.